Well, good morning to all of you here at the network office, as well as those around our network this morning. The Westminster Shorter Catechism begins with a question. What is the chief end of man or humankind? And there's a simple answer that follows. The chief end of man, of humankind, is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And I think that echoes the story of creation, especially as we look at it in Genesis 1 and 2. Irenaeus was a 2nd century bishop of Lyons, and he made a famous declaration. He did it in Latin, of course, Gloria Dei, vivens homo. And he says, the glory of God is men and women who are fully alive, fully human, created in the image of God, to enjoy the relationship with their Creator, to enjoy the life that they experienced, the relationships that are there, and to fulfill their vocational calling so that it's all to the glory of God. That the reality is, in that same story, when we get to Genesis 3, we see that something dramatically happened that changed everything in the course of our human lives. And today we call it the fall. We call it that time when things just radically were different. Now, as even then, we live in a world where there's both beauty and tragedy, where there's goodness as well as brokenness, where there's wonder as well as woundedness, all because of our human sin. If you don't believe it, just turn on the nightly news again. Or if you don't believe it, just look at your own lives. All of us do. The writer Qoheleth, in that puzzling wisdom book called Ecclesiastes, kind of captured the range of human experience. It's a familiar passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He said, for everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. And down in verse 4, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance. What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. There was a commercial a number of years ago that said, you only go around once, so grab all the gusto you can. Or in maybe a language of a younger generation, YOLO, you only live once, so get all you can now. Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes, while he starts out rather pessimistically, he says, life is meaningless, it's vanity, it's empty. He does it in a sense, I think, to take us to a place that no matter what our endeavors that we pursue, and believe me, this guy pursued them all. He pursued great projects, he pursued properties and wealth and wisdom and pleasures. In fact, he says it himself, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. But he takes us to a place that we realize that these in and of themselves are not the end and purpose of our lives. Unless they are received and enjoyed as gifts from God. Because none of these, ultimately, and I know our culture, the one with the most toys wins, and the more we have, the better life will be. But ultimately, they don't satisfy because of the imprint of eternity that God has placed on our hearts. Augustine still said it best, you, O Lord, have created us for yourself, and our hearts are restless, still hungry, unsatisfied, until they find their rest in you. And I think one of the true gifts of God that He made us as human beings is our emotions in the full range of them. Whether we're sad, glad, or mad, whatever it is, all that we have. There's a time to cry, the writer said, and a time to laugh. And we need some real times of laughter amidst the seriousness of life. Because laughter is good for us. Humor is healthy. There was a medical doctor with a PhD who concluded his study, and he said these words: laughter can lead to direct physiological changes in the muscular, cardiovascular, immune, and neuroendocrine systems, which have immediate as well as long-term beneficial effects on our bodies. Another person wrote, laughter is a powerful antidote to stress, to pain, and to conflict. Nothing works faster or more dependably to bring our mind and body back into balance than just a good laugh. The proverb says, a cheerful heart is what? Good medicine. And it affects us all. And I think one of the persons who could make laughter good medicine, of course, was Robin Williams. It was sad to see his picture on the front of Time magazine with the beginning of his life in 1951 and dying, unfortunately, too young at the age of 63, battling as he did over his lifetime with recovery from addictions, depression, and as we've learned recently, just from his own Parkinson's disease, which perhaps all contributed to his taking of his own life. I don't know if I've seen anybody, and I've seen some comedians over the years, who was so quick-witted, so energetic, and it was just plain hilarious. It was like a Gatling gun of things that just flowed out of him. If you watched in the early days Mork and Mindy, or you saw some of his movies, Mrs. Doubtfire, R.V., Patch Adams, and yet he could betray some really deeply dramatic roles as well. Good Will Hunting, Good Morning Vietnam, or Dead Poets Society. He actually plays actual Patch Adams, who was a physician, who was not only concerned about treating diseases, but he said we need to treat persons with good medical treatment, what they really need, but also with compassion, with care, and with humor, with laughter. And he did that throughout that movie. That's a great movie, I think, even for pastors to see, in terms of the care that we give to people. There is a time to cry, and there's a time to laugh. Paul said that in the New Testament, didn't he? He says, weep with those who weep, and cry with those who cry. Laugh. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Have you ever been to a funeral or conducted one? We all have. Where at one moment they're laughing about some quirk of grandpa or grandma, and the next minute they're crying, all in the same thing. How wonderfully made we are. I remember Jim McKay, who was a sportscaster for ABC for a number of years, and he would broadcast the beginning of the Olympics and the sports, and he would talk about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And there's some moments where we all feel a bit of defeat. And yet we also are called at this point, no matter midst of whatever we're going through in life, to pause, to laugh, to enjoy even the simplest of pleasures, not just alone, but maybe with others. And that's the good thing about being together and laughing together and enjoying life. Not as ends in themselves, but as grace gifts from a God who loves and cares for each of us in wonderful personal ways. Maybe we ought to get a little childlike sometimes. Didn't say childish, I said childlike. And that we can enjoy the pleasures that God extends to us. There's a time to laugh. Take time to laugh in your life. The psalmist said this in Psalm 16. He says, you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. We need to experience those pleasures as gifts from our God who loves us and cares. So if you had a bad week, a bad day, and have a laugh as you enjoy the pleasures that God gives us. Have a great day and a great laugh.